Hey y'all. This is the Black Youth Project. I'm a managing editor, Amber Butts, and we are joined by the amazing Raquel Willis, a Black trans artist, activist, award-winning writer, media strategist, and recently, actually, the director of communications for Miss Foundation, and also one of my great friends. Thank you so much, Raquel, for saying yes to this interview. We're really just going to be talking the way we talk in general. So share whatever it is you'd like to share. Say no to whatever it is you don't want to share. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be in conversation with you, Amber. I know we talked about this a little bit ago, earlier in the summer, and it felt like so far off. And here we are at the end of, Black August ended yesterday, but we're in September now, but just glad that this is happening and we get to chat.
I'm excited. I'm super excited for all of it. Do you want to just jump into the questions?
Yeah.
Okay, dope. So one of the questions I have for you is just how has your writing, specifically writing your book, been amidst, the pandemic and shelter in place?
Yeah. Wow. Well, earlier in the pandemic, I actually got into a groove. I feel like the first few months, everyone was kind of having their existential crises, and I was just kind of finally in a groove of waking up at the same time every day, writing a good amount every day. And yeah, sometime after May, things just started shifting. I think the Ahmaud Arbery situation was going on. I had already kind of been in tune to some of the instances of violence and murder that Black trans women have been facing, like Monica Diamond and Nina Pop. And then, of course, everything that happened surrounding the murder of George Floyd. So that really shifted a lot of the energy. And so I feel like I was kind of thrust out of this very regimented moment of creation, and really forced to reflect on a lot of things and reckon with a lot of things. So my habits changed. Even the direction of the book shifted some too, because originally I was kind of working on an essay collection about so many different things: cultural critique, my experiences in journalism and activism and organizing. And now my project has become more of a traditional memoir about my experiences in social justice movement. So, things have shifted. And I think for me as a writer, I also have my organizer hat on. And so for me, it's about how do I meet this moment, and how do I actually create something that hopefully will not only just outlive this moment, but also meet what my people, my communities need, right? Because they're always kind of at the core of who I'm writing for.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And yeah, that's amazing. Your book shifted in a way that is unexpected, but also so necessary. How long has it been now that you've been working on it?
I have been working off and on, and in a very fragmented way, really since I left college back in 2013. So I have been chronicling different things, keeping notes, writing in fits and bursts. And so now it's just really compiling all of that and making it make sense, right? And be accessible in a way that's kind of outside of my own typical kind of Gemini airiness all over the place.
I feel you with that abstract, trying to make it more concrete and accessible for folks to be able to really engage. What's something that you're hoping to, create or get from your book?
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping to look at, I think, the snapshot of the first, I think, iteration, what I'm considering a first iteration of the movement for Black Lives, and my observations as a Black trans woman, in that. Also honoring, I think, authenticity around being an activist and organizer, right? Like, I don't have all the answers. I've never thought that I had all of the answers. I think coming into this work, you're forced to be very vulnerable and forced to learn a lot, right? If you're trying to actually um, move folks in a particular way, like, you have to be a particular type of vulnerable to grow in all of that, right? Be transformed in the service of the work, as a lot of folks in movement say. So I hope I can bring some authenticity and vulnerability. I hope that this volume will be accessible to folks who are really at different stages of their own kind of awakening to how these systems of oppression have impacted their lives and their communities. So I hope all of that vulnerability comes through. I think a lot of the memoirs and personal observations of folks who have been in movement or throughout time, a lot of it has come from a very particular sense of authority. And while I do consider myself an authority in some ways, particularly on my experience, right, as an individual, I'm also perfectly fine being raw and vulnerable about the shit that I don't know, right, and that I would like to know.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially as like Black women, we're told we gotta have it all together. Everything has to be compact. But really, when we engage in that softness and like move into that vulnerability, that's where like a lot of opportunities come up for our organizing, our relationships, and just the world in general. So it's really exciting that that's been your hope and your approach as well. And also, I'm so happy that I've been able to like listen to you talk about your book for this time, and it's happening, which is like just so exciting. Like, went from an idea to actually tangible. Just
It's
get it,
happening. We are
get it.
naming it and claiming it, honey.
Yes. Let's shift into something else. Let's talk a little bit about your creative process. What do you think, like, the Black imagination has, how has it shaped your creative process?
Ew, the Black imagination. Yeah, I mean, for me, when I'm writing, particularly because I'm writing nonfiction, though I imagine there are some similar patterns in kind of the fiction that I think I want to write after this. Um, I'm thinking about ancestry, right? Like, it's not just kind of this like cheeky, hokey thing um, that I say, and I think a lot of Black creators say. I think there is something about creating work that speaks to our history, right? That does justice to our history, but also justice to our potential as a people. Um, and so, I think the luxury of having what's considered a dominant lens, right, of being white, of being a man, of being cis, of being straight, is that you can create under the guise of creating without, creating with a blank canvas, right, and creating with colors and tools and textures and tones that are seen as the default, right? And seen as devoid of an agenda or devoid of a particular identity. But I feel like as a Black trans woman, I'm not gonna lie about that shit, right? You know, everyone is creating from some kind of agenda, from some kind of lens. And the beauty of being Black and knowing your Blackness, the beauty of being trans and knowing your transness, of being queer, knowing your queerness, all of these different things, is that you can have clarity around your voice. You can have authenticity in where you're coming from, what you're pulling inspiration from, and not be trapped in this idea of having to create something for everyone, right? Like, who needs to find your work is going to find your work. So if you know your identity, know your experience, know your history, know where you're trying to get to, know your vision of liberation in some way, the right people are going to find it.
Yes to all of that. One of my favorite examples of you know, really like living your truth and trusting that your audience will be there and will hold you is like Mama Toni Morrison. Like,
Yes.
all those interviews she would have where these white men and women would say, well, who are you writing to? And what about the white people? And she was like, I'm not writing to them. So if they buy my book, they buy my book. But ultimately, like, she was so unapologetic about just writing for us, and specifically Black women, in a way that like held our grief and complexity and fierceness, which is just, yeah. I love that you brought up the ancestors too. Do you have any specific ancestors that you think about that help ground your writing, your life, and your activism?
Yeah, so many, named and unnamed, you know, ones that I know of and ones that I don't. You know, I think that's also, you know, often one of the things, particularly when you're you know, a Black person living in America who is descended from, you know, enslaved Africans, is I feel like we're on a lifelong journey of making peace with the parts of ourselves that we've been stripped of, and finding other ways to be whole, right? And we can do that. And so, you know, definitely, you know, when I think about writing, Mama Toni, as you were saying, Uncle James Baldwin, thinking of Audre Lorde, right? And so those are, you know, some of our great poets and fiction and nonfiction writers. But I guess going into another lane of nonfiction, you know, when I think about Black feminist scholarship, that is such a part of a writing tradition that I lean on. You know, the Barbara Smiths, the Barbara Ransbys, the so many folks, Patricia Hill Collins. I think about someone like a Melissa Harris Perry, we don't talk enough about, you know, a Michelle Alexander, all of those folks. And also an Ida B. Wells, Anna Julia Cooper. You know, there's so many, Angela Davis, you know, I could go on and on. And also, you know, when I think about folks that I pull energy from, you know, my writing is also informed by the words and acts of people like Marsha P. Johnson, right? Also someone like Sylvia Rivera, right? Our Latina auntie. Stormy Delivery, Miss Major, you know, that kind of ruthlessness and in her own kind of raw clarity, right? I hope to embody in my work, whatever it is. So all of those folks, and then of course, you know, the men of our history, right, who always get named. They're there. You know them. I don't have to say their names, right? It's a different kind of power to say the names of those who aren't often given their credit in moving us closer to Black liberation. So.
Absolutely, 100% agree, because those are names that don't even have to be thought of or written to already be in our minds. And we are often embedded with this chorus of old white men in our heads, and to like get them out is like very challenging, but once they out, they got to stay out. So I feel you on that. So you've been cooking a lot. Let's talk about like home, because I know, you know, your mom travels and visits you, and you see your sister and your brother and your nibblings. But when you think about home, which foods first come to mind, and who made them?
Ew, which foods first come to mind? I mean, definitely my mom's cooking. Her fried chicken, of course. The best I've ever had. Everything else is just trying to be her fried chicken. Always good. It was, and it's like when you get older and you start cooking, and having that consistency is hard. Having it taste the same, have the same texture, everything, no matter what you're cooking, is hard. So I salute her for that. She also had this like sour cream pound cake that was like my favorite. You know, she would make all kinds of things that were fancier. She'd make like a coconut pie each Thanksgiving. Her sweet potato pies were great. German chocolate, red velvet, but it was that like pound cake that was typically unadorned, although every now and then she would do like a lemon glaze on it or something. But just that pound cake, to make a basic cake be everything you need for dessert, that's a special kind of skill and power. So I think about those things. Now I also think about my grandma Inez, or Ines, as she would say when she was feeling highfalutin and, you know, in front of white folks. But she would make this, she had this recipe for the salmon mold. And, you know, and I didn't necessarily care that much about the salmon mold, because at that time, you know, I really wasn't a big fish person growing up. I always hated all the bones and everything, but we always ate like seafood. Now I'm like, I love it, you know, any type of fish. But the ritual of her creating that salmon mold, because, you know, you've got to get all the ingredients together, mix them up right to the right consistency so it actually congeals together, put it in the mold, which was this like fabulous, ornate bronze. It looked like an actual fish once you took it out of the mold. And then you have to put it in the freezer, you know, or the refrigerator so that it can congeal. So she would make that thing. We rarely ate all of it because it was pretty big, you know, because it was really an appetizer. But she was always so excited to have that. And I think about that and the care and the love that goes into the things that, you know, our ancestors make and made, just the ritual that we deserve something beautiful.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like also the bits about we deserve something beautiful and something whole. As like someone who cooks a lot, one of the things that I saw when growing up, always coming from like Southern folks, was, you know, the women always cooking and always creating. And it was like childhood was like the movie Soul Food, you know, like everybody like in the kitchen except like one auntie who didn't know how to cook. And when I finally actually made my grandmother's salmon croquettes, which was just like 4 months ago, I just broke down, because I think there's a different level of grief that happens when you make the food that someone who's no longer here used to make. And so I didn't consider doing that for a long time. And then I came from the approach of like, this is how they honor us, and this is how we honor them, by, you know, ensuring that folks have those recipes and things. And my grandma couldn't cook, so I might just be real and say that my salmon croquettes were better. But it's that she probably like shaking her head at me right now. But it's that process of like remembering, and also the bit about often when our folks cooked, they didn't rest, they didn't eat before everybody else ate. And so like kind of shifting that, recognizing the work that it took to get there, but also shifting that to be like, I'm gonna eat before I feed everybody else.
Yeah.
So I'm totally feeling that. This might get you in trouble, but I'm gonna ask this question anyway.
Okay.
Have you made anything recently that you think might rival one of your family members' dishes?
Rival one of my family members' dishes. I did make fried chicken. Well, I haven't been eating as much meat this year, but I did make some fried chicken that was really crispy, really good. Would I say it was better than my mom? No. The funny thing is I don't even really try to, and I think obviously it's because my mom is, alive, but I don't try to go toe to toe with my mom's recipes. Now my grandma, because she mostly ate TV dinners, because by the time I was like a teenager, she was like in her 70s, right? And so the idea of her like cooking all the time just wasn't realistic. It was only really going to happen on special occasions, holidays and stuff. But one of the regular meals that she continued to make was fried pork chops, but like a Parmesan Italian breadcrumb pork chop. She would make that, and then she would make like stovetop dressing to go with it. And it was like everything. And so I have made that before. Probably better than her too. But she taught me, so I got to make it to the way I would want it to be made. So yeah, but a lot of what I've been cooking during quarantine has been new things, right? Or trying to get some basics down, right? Like trying to strip away all the fanciness, like making a good roast chicken in a skillet. You can't go wrong with that. I made that last week for some friends who I had never cooked for. And they were like, oh, okay, girl. And I was like, I can do a little something if you nice. So that was cute. I made like a tomato soup from scratch like a couple of months ago. That was so good. Had never made a soup from scratch. So I've been experimenting with some kind of like basic recipes just to get them down too. Now that I've had time.
Yeah, a couple months ago, I think some like a sauce, some hush puppies. I don't remember. We were on like a call, and you were like, I made this, girl, and it was so good. And I said, let me see, and it looked good. So
I can't even remember what it is. I've done a lot of cooking though. Probably the most cooking I've ever done in my life during quarantine. So
it's beautiful to be able to make things and then just eat them and enjoy them and know the work that went into creating them. And the basics. I've been making a lot of biscuits.
Oh, see, I've never made biscuits from scratch. I'm so afraid of dough, so I don't know why.
I am too, actually. I was like, I don't think I can do bread, but I can do biscuits. But now, like, I've perfected biscuits. I can make all kinds of biscuits. So there's only one change in ingredients for scones. So I think I'm going to move to scones and build my way up to bread.
Okay.
So, okay. We'll see. I'll let you know. Okay, so let's shift again. Let's talk about grief and joy in this moment. You've had a really consistent practice of, self-care, especially during quarantine or shelter in place. So what are you learning about grief and joy in these moments?
Ooh, what am I learning about grief and joy? Oh, I wonder, in this question, if I even am necessarily learning anything new. I think I've become accustomed to the grief. Because, I was 19 when I lost my father to a stroke kind of out of nowhere. And then 6 months after that, my grandmother passed, the one with the salmon mold and everything. She was like my third parent growing up, his mom. And so that year, I think that was my grow up year. That was the year that I really faced loss in a particular way, and this idea of the fact that, we have amazing people around us. We have families, in whatever way, shape, and form. We have communities, but we have to figure out how to define our lives on our own terms. And so that was kind of the biggest lesson I think I gained from that. And so then the grief, I think of after those moments, having a wider aperture to take in what is happening in the world, the scores of murders of Black trans folks, Black trans women, Black men in general, Black women in general, is hard. And I think I've allowed myself grace in terms of the fact that I'm not going to be affected the same way each time, right? Like sometimes my response is going to be numb. Sometimes my response is going to be anger and rage. Sometimes my response, and I think a lot of times for us as activists and organizers and thinkers, is trying to be solution oriented. And then other times we're depleted and we don't have the energy to think in that way, right? Sometimes it is an accomplishment to even just let ourselves feel the visceral emotions that come up. So this year has been hard. I think it would be a disservice to the experiences I've had before. I think the experiences that Black people have had before this year, to say it's necessarily the worst year ever.
I'm with you. Yeah. All of the complexities of that and the checking in and out of grief, because I think in some ways, Black folks are really, really intimate with grief. Mm-hmm. It's our life in a way, but I think too, kind of rejecting the narratives that folks have said, like being Black is exhausting, because being Black is not exhausting. But the impact that white supremacy, patriarchy, and all these violences have on Black bodies, and specifically Black trans bodies, is the part that needs to be eradicated and like completely destroyed.
Absolutely. Yeah, I reject the idea that being Black is exhausting, or being any kind of marginalized is like exhausting, right? I think what's exhausting and draining are the systems of oppression that leave us marginalized, right? But who we are, our essence, is not exhausting. Does it call for more? Yes. And that is the honor and dignity of being Black, of being queer, of being trans, of being a woman. It does call for us to be more. It calls for us to be expansive. And so I think that we have this idea that liberation will bring us close, will necessitate a world that brings us closer to being like the folks who have all the privilege. But liberation is actually bringing them to be as expansive as we are, and expansive as our lens is.
Absolutely. I think even around, transformative justice restorative justice, and the difference between that and punitive approaches is emblematic of, like, if we want to abolish the police, right? Like, I'm an abolitionist. I don't think the police should exist. And yet there are folks who identify as abolitionists who then want to reinforce the carceral state just without the police being involved. And so we have to have very real conversations about what we mean about, like, what is expansive, what's accountability, all of these different, like, layers. Because I agree, when you come from the approach of, you know, our identities expand our worlds and our lives instead of limit them, we open up more space for us to be ourselves, and we open up space for a better world now and in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think clarity is key. And look, if in this moment you are feeling rage, if in this moment you are wanting revenge, right, for our suffering, I think that is valid. And, you know, I think clarity calls for us to interrogate, you know, all of that, right? That's not liberatory for me to be coming from a place of revenge or anger, you know? And so, yeah, I totally agree. I think we got to figure out what we're actually asking for when we're talking about accountability.
Definitely. We kind of talked a bit about, like, your self-care practices, but could you talk a little bit more about, like, what self-care practices you've actualized or are aspiring to during shelter in place and beyond?
Yeah, I have been doing what I now consider plant meditation, thanks to my therapist validating me each morning. And so I go around, check my plants. I have like a hydroponic garden, so it makes it easy to incorporate that into each day. So that is meditating for me. I try and take a walk every day as much as possible. Today I started, you know, I got up early today and actually did some sprinting around my neighborhood instead of just the walking, because I'm trying to also, like, you know, get a little fitness on or whatever. I'm not a fitness girl. I wish I was. I wish I could find the joy in it. Maybe I will. So I'm trying to incorporate that back in. Yeah, you know, I think there's a lot of shame around self-care and not doing it or not doing it right. And I think that our energy would be better spent shaming the systems that make self-care so much more necessary, right, than maybe they would be if we could just be our organic selves and strive to organic expressions of our worth in this world. So I think it's messy. It's different for everybody. I'm not great at habit forming. I know that about myself as I get closer and closer to my 30th year on this planet. And so it is what it is. And so we're working with what we know and around what we know. And so I, you know, when I have to recalibrate, I extend a lot of grace to myself.
That's great. Yeah. I think the only way we're going to get out is being graceful to ourselves. Like, not just this pandemic, because of course there are a multitude of pandemics happening for Black lives and specifically Black trans lives. But this world teaches us that we should not be graceful ever with ourselves, and that we must constantly be producing lest we be deemed, not worthy of anything, including self-care. And also the ways that self-care has been, kind of privatized, capitalized, and like individualized. But self-care can also be a communal process, where that other folks are checking in with each other and stuff. So,
right. Yeah.
Go ahead. You want to share anything else?
Yeah, one of the things that I say every now and then is that, my sisters and my siblings are self-care. And so last week, I really took time to I think strengthen, some of the relationships that, we get called away from because of work and all of the rigmarole that goes with that. And so, those maintaining of relationships in our lives is self-care, right? Calling, our loved ones is self-care, hopefully. So I definitely think that relationship building and strengthening is also a part of self-preservation.
Yes, to all of that. What are some of your hopes for Black trans futures?
Black trans futures, hopes.
And presence also. Like, I feel like often it's like people push out and cast out to the future, but also in this moment, what are your hopes?
Yeah, I feel like we are in an unprecedented time of Black trans leadership. Not that we haven't always been leaders, but that there are just so many more of us now because of having the tools, the language, the access to articulating our experiences. And so I hope that we continue to see that. I hope that we will continue to grasp the empowerment necessary to build up our dignity and honor in the society, and how it is seen and viewed and respected. The funny thing is that I think we're doing in general what we need to do. I think, a lot of my call to action is to people who are not, Black and trans, to cis people. How are you going to interrogate your own issues around gender? Because you got that, boo. That's not just something that we are holding. To white folks, non-Black folks, like, what are you gonna do to figure out your own insecurities around who you are, right? And for everyone, it's about interrogating what it means to relinquish power to those who have been deemed perpetually powerless. And what does it mean to move from a space of simply centering yourself to one where you actually center the collective, and understanding that the collective doesn't look like you, doesn't always love like you, doesn't always live like you, unfortunately, right? And so how do we do that, right? How do we hold that we are all oppressed in some way and also oppressors in some way? So I mean, I think in general, that's what I think about it, because I think everyone is some kind of gender nonconforming. I think Blackness calls for us to be inherently gender nonconforming because of, these social constructs that are so laden with white supremacy and capitalism and all of these different trappings. So I think that Black trans power is something that everyone can and should be invested in.
Right. I feel like you answered my other question too, but I'll ask it anyway. What opportunities do you see, and what might the movement do to support Black trans lives more explicitly, not just on paper or as hashtags?
Yeah. Well, I think continuing to elevate our leadership, and if you have not been doing that, do that for the first time today. Funding our efforts and supporting us in finding funding and resources for efforts that we lead. There are numerous Black trans-led organizations, some probably where you live, that have gone long neglected. And so you have got to figure out what your commitment is to furthering that work. And let's just be clear, I think that everyone loves to focus on basic ass shit. Like, oh, well, I'll try and get your pronouns right, or I'll try and get your name right, or whatever that is. A tokenized version of inclusion. But at the core, how are you going to hire Black trans people? More than one at your organization. How are you going to envision the fact that the best leader probably is a Black trans person, that you are not giving the adequate space and time and energy to, right? I think I've gotten to the point, in my work, where I think the best leaders are actually Black, trans, and gender nonconforming people, period. And it's by design that we don't often have the access to refine our skills the ways we need to, or we don't often have the access to build our own personal power and platforms the way that we need to. And so I think it's time for organizations and leaders to recognize that if you say you're fighting for all Black people and you aren't hiring Black trans people, or even extending the offer, right, giving us a chance to say no, you're not actually fighting for a more expansive vision of Black liberation. You're not pro-Black if you're not pro-Black trans people, pro-Black queer people, pro-Black women, period.
Period. I agree. I mean, I think too, like there's more representation of Black trans folks in the media. There's Black trans folks on mastheads and all of these things, but it's also important to like note that while folks may be on posters and things like that, Black trans folks are struggling to get their rent paid, to get groceries in their homes, to get medical resources, all of these different things. And especially Black trans elders who have been doing this work for forever, who are struggling in our communities every day. And there, are not many people checking on them. And the folks that are checking on them are usually also trans and non-binary folks. And so this is also a moment for people to really recommit or commit for the first time to that work, and actually like prioritize the lives and well-being of Black trans folks everywhere across the diaspora.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap up soon, but I wanted to know if you had a list of 5 Black trans folks that people should be on the lookout for, trying to support their work, resources. I'm going to be posting some GoFundMes, all of that stuff.
Yeah, so many. My friend Tony Michelle, one of my best friends, Tony Michelle Williams, the executive director of Solutions Not Punishments Collaborative in Atlanta, SNAPCO. I did an internship there years ago as kind of, in some ways was my entry into movement work. Aria Saeed, one of the co-founders of the Transgender District out in San Francisco, powerful work. Nala Simone, who has started an initiative called Road, I believe, and she is just a powerful organizer. Ian Phil Stewart of the Okra Project, which focuses on alleviating food insecurity for Black trans folks in the New York City, New Jersey, and Philly areas. So many. Mariah Moore co-founded House of Tulip down in New Orleans with Milan Nicole Sherry. Cayenne Dorshow of Glitz Inc. Is also, a movement auntie. I won't call her an elder. Movement auntie who has no problem lifting up the banner of being an international whore, as she would say. So many. There's so many. That's just a few.
Thank you so much for that list. Thank you for this interview. Are any things that you want to close out with, share before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think that's it. Thank you for this amazing interview. And I know I gave a list of folks, but I always encourage folks to look around you and find the Black trans-led organizations, initiatives, efforts, and just leaders in your local community. So often, you can only get a short list, right? And oftentimes you're being asked to support folks who, aren't even necessarily closest to you, right? So that's always the best thing to do. And yes, I appreciate this time to chat, and it was fun. Great question.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm loving our outfit coordination and lipstick situation right now too. Hey. Always. All right, I'll talk with you soon. Thank you so much, Raquel Willis. This has been amazing.
You.
Congratulations on your new role.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.